I am extremely delighted to offer my appreciation for the wonderful work that has gone into producing this Disability Inclusivity Handbook. But stopping at that will not do justice to the tremendous amount of work that has gone into it. The Joint National Associations of Persons with Disabilities, JONAPWD, the main beneficiary of this handbook, sincerely appreciates the considerable effort that has gone into putting together this comprehensive guide for those who wish to know more about disability and how to interact with persons with disabilities. This handbook is a very practical manual for both the public and private sectors, and one which everyone should try and read. It fills a major information gap and will help create the much needed awareness of the issues concerning disability in our country. Our thanks for initiating this unprecedented work go first and foremost to the Department for International Development, DFID, Coalitions for Change, C4C program, which works through coalitions to promote the interests of marginalized groups and minorities. People with disabilities are one of the groups much neglected in our society. In successfully working with the Coalition on Disability, the Affirmation of Rights of Persons with Disabilities, ARPWD, to produce this handbook, C4C has demonstrated a resounding first for the Nigerian nation to embrace and emulate. The great effort that C4C and ARPWD have put into this Disability Inclusivity Handbook must be gratefully recognized. I also wish to personally congratulate the authors, the very supportive, committed, and dedicated members of C4C, and all persons with disabilities and others who joined hands to ensure the effective production, validation, and publication of this handbook. It will, without question, serve as the ABC on disability. This handbook marks a new and exciting beginning. I am sure others will want to build on the strong foundations laid here, adding to and refining the contents in future editions. Danlami Umaru Basharu, Esquire, National President, Joint National Associations of Persons with Disabilities, JONAPWD. Contents. Forward, page Roman numeral 1. In appreciation, page Roman numeral 4. Contents, page Roman numeral 5. About this handbook, page 1. Rationale, page 1. Scope, page 1. Methodology, page 3. Note on the language and terminology used, page 3. Part 1. Understanding disability, page 5. Interpretations of disability, page 6. Key terminology, page 9. Words matter, page 10. Guidance for interacting with persons with disabilities, page 11. Barriers to inclusivity, page 20. 1. Attitudes, discrimination, stigma, and prejudice, page 22. 2. Environment, accessibility to buildings and services, page 22. 3. Institutions, policies, practices, and procedures, page 24. Part 2. Situation Overview. Key observations of disability issues in Nigeria, page 27. 1. Political will, page 27. 2. Organizational practice, page 28. 3. Organizations of Regional Instruments, Africa, page 44. National Instruments and Key Organizations, page 45. Part 3. Inclusivity in Practice, page 51. Key Elements of Mainstreaming Disability, page 52. Nothing about us without us. The role of persons with disabilities and organizations of and for persons with disabilities, page 53. Getting started. Practical steps to implementing inclusivity, page 54. Understanding the guidelines, page 54. Appendices, page 61. Appendix A, acronyms, page 61. Appendix B, disability and impairment types, page 63. Appendix C, Resource Bank, page 64. Appendix D, Bibliography, page 69. About this handbook. Rationale. It is estimated that 1/10 of the world's population lives with disability. In Nigeria, at least 19 million people, over 20% of the population, live with disability. Lang and Upar, 2008, page 17. Persons with disabilities, PWD, around the world, and especially in developing countries, continue to be the most vulnerable and least empowered group of people, despite being the largest minority in the world. In Nigeria, society's limited understanding of disability has resulted in a charity-welfare approach to engaging with persons with disabilities and to disability issues. This approach has failed to recognize inclusivity for persons with disabilities as a matter of human rights, social justice, and socio-economic development. Furthermore, the institutional infrastructure to empower persons with disabilities and enable them to participate in mainstream society remains desperately underdeveloped. Scope. This handbook gives a basic overview of concepts and key issues to be considered in advancing inclusivity for persons with disabilities both in policy and in practice. It is intended for individuals or change makers that are in a position to effect change within their organizations, be it a government agency, private sector business, or non-governmental organization (NGO). It is expected that the change agents within an organization will have the authority and influence to apply the practical recommendations in this handbook effectively. The handbook also offers guidance on interacting with persons with disabilities as a reference for anyone who wishes to be inclusive in their day-to-day activities and relationships. The handbook is organized into 3 parts. Part 1, Understanding Disability, offers an overview of how society generally interacts with persons with disabilities, with an appreciation of disability as an evolving concept. It offers a brief comparison of the 2 main interpretations of disability, the medical and social models, and the consequent societal response. Understanding perceptions of disability is the first step towards improving the way people without disabilities engage with those with disabilities. To ensure a common understanding of the central ideas discussed in the handbook, Part 1 continues with definitions of key terminology. This is followed by the section Words Matter, which highlights contentious language frequently used in describing disabilities and suggests alternatives to derogatory words. Understanding Disability ends with an overview of society's major barriers to inclusivity for persons with disabilities. Part 2, Situation Overview. Within the scope of this handbook, it is impossible to capture the entire experience of persons with disabilities and the numerous causes of their marginalization. However, Part 2 attempts to highlight critical issues that persons with disabilities experience in relation to inclusivity or the lack thereof, particularly in the context of Nigeria. The section raises double discrimination against women and girls with disabilities as a critical issue that is often overshadowed by the broader disability agenda. It explores the issue of violence against women and girls with disabilities, looking specifically at what constitutes violence and why women and girls with disabilities are more vulnerable to violence than any other group. Part 2 also highlights the plight of children with disabilities and the neglect of their human rights. Although several initiatives have been put in place to protect children's rights, in reality, the situation is grim. Until recently, there has been relatively little information available to properly assess and respond to the needs of children with disabilities. This handbook offers practical suggestions on how to create and encourage inclusivity for children with disabilities. Part 2 ends with a review of existing global, regional, and national instruments for representing and protecting persons with disabilities. Part 3, Inclusivity in Practice, offers practical guidance for anyone seeking concrete measures they can take to incorporate the perspective of persons with disabilities into an organization. This guidance covers practical steps to implementing inclusivity and explains how to conduct an equality impact assessment. While this handbook does not claim to be exhaustive, it does attempt to provide practical guidance on disability issues and inclusivity. It should be noted that disability and inclusivity are dynamic topics requiring context-specific consideration. As such, appropriate disability policies and strategies vary, and the recommendations offered should be customized according to sector and organizational objectives. Appendix C provides a resource bank for those who wish to seek support from organizations of and for persons with disabilities (OPDs) in implementing inclusivity or assessing services. Methodology. The methodology employed in developing this handbook included reviewing existing literature on disability issues in both an international and a national context. Additionally, consultations were held with key stakeholders working within the disability sector, and a concerted effort was made to consult with representatives of OPDs. Interviews were conducted with representatives from the Nigerian disability community, from partnership organizations in the Coalitions for Change, issue-based projects (IBPs), and from human rights-based civil society institutions. The handbook's recommendations and practical guidelines are informed by focus group discussions held with representatives of OPDs, existing best practices, and lessons learned from issue-based projects through extensive research. The guidelines, it is hoped, can be adopted and contextualized within the current strategic objectives of C4C's IBPs, particularly the affirmation of rights of persons with disabilities, ARPWD Coalition, and other agencies and organizations in Nigeria. A note on the language and terminology used. Although this handbook offers suggestions on widely acceptable terms used to refer to disability and persons living with disabilities, it is not intended to set a standard terminology for the disability community in Nigeria. As such, care has been taken to make use of the language used by the local disability community when describing disability and persons affected by it. This handbook will generally use the phrase person (S) with disabilities in accordance with the ideas of People First language. People First language reinforces the fact that the person comes before the disabilities. It should be noted, however, that the disability movement in other parts of the world uses different terminology such as disabled persons or impaired. When reference is made to international practices or literature that uses alternative terminology, the handbook does not deviate from the terminology used in the original literature or project.